So welcome to the third day of Diagrid launch week. We're really excited. This is the first annual launch week, or I guess the first launch week generally. And we really just wanted to showcase all of the great work that's being done across the Diagrid teams, both the internal product teams and also the work that's being done in upstream Dapr. So we've covered a couple of events already, which I'll go into in the next couple of slides. But if you haven't already signed up and you just signed up for this event, which I think everyone here did sign up, so you should be good. But definitely make sure you keep a pulse. We're going to update the launch week website with several blog posts tomorrow, and we're also going to do a summary email that has all of the recordings and everything as Zoe mentioned. So definitely stay tuned, and we will also be potentially doing another hackathon in the early in the new year. So would be really excited to have everyone participate and definitely try out some of these new features we'll be talking about today, more hands-on. So I'm not sure who else on the call, if we have any new folks in our audience, but just kind of want to reiterate the mission of Diagrid, which is really to build tooling that enables developers to be more productive. And that really starts with Dapr, which is kind of the core project that our products are centered around, and were created by our CEO and our CTO. So Diagrid and Dapr really is like a very much better together story. There's not really one without the other. They, depend on one another. We're collaborating across the project in order to make Diagrid products, better for our users. So that's where we're going to start today, is just talking a little bit about Dapr, especially because it is, Dapr's recently graduated, and we had the 115 release. So I just want to kind of cover some of those since it impacts the features you're going to see today in Diagrid Catalyst. So if you're unfamiliar, Dapr is an open source project called the Distributed Application Runtime, and it essentially makes it easier for developers to build microservice applications. So it provides pattern-based APIs that developers can use and consume, and it also decouples developers from bringing infrastructure code into their business logic. And this is sort of what it looks like at a high level. I would assume at this point, most people on the call are probably somewhat familiar with how Dapr works, but ultimately just imagine your application is running, you import, an SDK for Dapr, which is typically how people will work with Dapr, and then you make API calls using the SDK. In the SDK case, it's gRPC, but you can also make just raw gRPC or HTTP calls, and you basically can access these set of developer APIs for doing things like saving data, publishing messages, writing stateful workflows, which we'll cover a lot of today. And then you get a lot of cross-cutting concerns layered on top of that, like observability, security, like access control lists, and resiliency, like circuit breaker, retry policies, those kind of things, without having to put them in the application code. So it's pretty powerful, but typically running on Kubernetes, with Dapr being injected into an application pod as a sidecar. So that's how the SDK is communicating, is over localhost to that Dapr sidecar instance. So Dapr has graduated. This is super, super exciting. If you're not really sure what this means, Dapr is a cloud native computing foundation project. And projects basically go through a set of steps in order to become what's called graduated, meaning it's reached a point of maturity, adoption, it's gone through a due diligence process. And so this is truly a huge milestone for the project. And now we are in a really good company with a lot of really impressive projects like Kubernetes itself, Kata, which was also worked on by Yaron, our CTO. So lots of really good projects in there, but super happy to see the Dapr logo now included as a graduated project. And also on top of that, Dapr 115 is coming. So for some of you, you may have joined our first launch week call, which was a Dapr 115 celebration, where we basically went through all of the new features that Diagrid is helping contribute to the upstream Dapr project. And the reason this is really relevant is because really without Dapr, there isn't Catalyst, right? Catalyst is providing Dapr in a way that's managed, in a way that makes it super easy to use and consume. It gives you that serverless model, but really like the new features that are coming out in Dapr are really influencing the new features that are going to be available in Catalyst. So things like the workflow API becoming more stable, things like streaming subscriptions, those are going to influence some of the features that we demo today and some of the new experiences that we are enabling in Catalyst. So yes, definitely check out this blog post. I'll send this slide deck over tomorrow with Zoe's updates. But just kind of wanted to call out once again, here at Diagrid, we build two products. Our focus today is Catalyst, but if you are interested in running Dapr yourself on Kubernetes, we provide Conductor. And as part of launch week, we've done a lot of really good updates across the entire like Diagrid set of products, as I mentioned. So the Dapr 115 celebration was on Tuesday. If you didn't get a chance to check it out, you'll have the link here. And then we also did a hands-on Dapr workshop on workflow yesterday with Alice and Fernando, which went really, really well. You can go through that content self-paced and get a really good fundamental understanding of how to use Dapr, the value proposition, things like that. So just wanted to highlight those. We also covered a lot of really great conductor updates. So if you are interested in that kind of open source management option, then definitely check those updates out. Now, here's the focus of where we are today. Today is going to be all about Catalyst. We have a lot of really good stuff for you. We've been working on a great demo, so I'm really excited to kind of walk you through the Catalyst experience, whether you're new to it or this is going to be an update for you on some of the new things that we're bringing to the product. But just to kind of give a high-level recap, Catalyst is a set of managed Dapr APIs. We currently expose 5 today, so workflow, PubSub, service invocation, state, and bindings. And then we provide some built-in management capabilities on top of that to make using Dapr basically a seamless and completely out-of-your-hands experience while still getting like that really cool, beneficial developer API surface that you can code against. So you can use the existing Dapr SDKs to communicate to the Catalyst-hosted Dapr APIs, and then you're going to get, built-in security, you get resiliency policies you can apply, and then you'll get observability that's brought to you through the Catalyst platform versus having to like build your own observability tooling. So any language or framework is supported, and then basically we provide integration across the different infrastructure providers that you can use for each of these different APIs. Today, we're really going to focus in on the 4 APIs that are shown here outside of binding. So it's really going to focus around workflows. We're going to talk about PubSub, and we're also going to show a new feature for PubSub streaming. So we'll kind of see what does PubSub look like today in Catalyst, and how are we evolving that feature through PubSub streaming subscriptions. We'll also talk a little bit about state management and invocation. And then on top of that, we'll talk about a new authentication feature that we've added to make connecting these APIs to your AWS resources a much more secure and streamlined process. So I want to kind of just call out the one big differentiator between Dapr and Catalyst is that, as I mentioned in the initial slides, Dapr runs as a sidecar on Kubernetes. It's injected as a sidecar into your application pod. But in the case of Catalyst, that sidecar is fully managed and completely abstracted away from you. So instead, your application code is going to be retrieving an application ID that it can basically use to communicate to the Catalyst service. So basically, you'll have your application and sort of an application twin to some extent, which provides an API token and a spiffy identity and other good insights into how your application is using the Dapr APIs that are fully hosted by Catalyst. And these projects that you'll deploy in order to work with Catalyst are all those resources are being deployed today in AWS US West 2, I believe. And the goal is we will continue to support greater regions in AWS. And another thing that's kind of a future roadmap thing that we're going to be working on over the next 6 months or so is providing the ability to actually host the Catalyst product in your own virtual network, right? In your own environment, so that the network connectivity is like really seamless and you're not having to go over the public internet. So that's another thing to consider and another roadmap item just to be aware of. Once again, things that we're thinking about to make sure that Catalyst is really meeting enterprise needs. So when you're running Dapr locally, or if you're running Dapr yourself, self-hosted, you're going to be calling that sidecar over the HTTP endpoint, which is typically localhost 3500. When you switch over to Catalyst, the only change you're making here is really that the HTTP endpoint for the sidecar and the gRPC endpoint for the sidecar become a Catalyst endpoint for your project. So pretty seamless, very easy to migrate between the two as well. And that's another thing we're going to be showcasing today. Johnny is going to talk a little bit about how seamless the experience can be from going from a traditional Dapr local development experience to using Catalyst and being able to remove local Dapr dependencies. So I want to dive straight in now to kind of the core of today's demo and technical overview, and it's all going to be around kind of Dapr workflow. So I do want to set the stage for what Dapr workflow is if maybe you haven't worked with it before. So as mentioned, workflow is one of the APIs that's provided by Dapr. It was released a couple of Dapr releases ago, and the goal is that it goes stable in Dapr 115, which should be released within the next month or so. And it essentially allows for a durable execution engine, right? For you to be able to author stateful workflows where the state is persisted in a pin only as an append only log basically in a database so that it can basically replenish itself from memory and those kind of things, right? And so the workflow API works with all the other Dapr APIs. So you can have a workflow that publishes messages. You can have a workflow that saves state. We provide workflow SDKs across multiple languages. And then basically you can completely have control over the type of workflows that you're authoring and the different patterns that are supported, right? So task chaining or fan out, fan in, which is basically what we're going to talk a little bit about today. You can also wait for external events if you're waiting for kind of like human intervention. You can set durable timers. You can also spin off child workflows. So lots of really, really powerful stuff in the workflow API and using this workflow engine that's basically embedded in the sidecar. And this really enables like very good scenarios for data processing, especially in the days that we're in now, like AI agentic workflows. Workloads are very popular for workflows. So using, Dapr workflows to basically orchestrate these kind of AI business processes is something that we're seeing a lot of. So this is what the Dapr workflow engine looks like from a technical perspective. So you have your application, which hosts the workflow definition and all of the activities, which will be doing computation and processing as part of the business logic. And then basically when your workflow application starts up, that workflow SDK is going to establish a bidirectional gRPC stream to the Dapr sidecar. And then you can basically invoke a series of workflow APIs to manage those workflows, right? To be able to start them, to pull them, and get their status, to resume or pause a workflow. And the Dapr sidecar is going to be facilitating the storage of all of the work item logs that are coming in so that your workflow app basically is receiving these work item streams from the Dapr sidecar. So basically the workflow engine is embedded directly into that sidecar. So what that looks like for Catalyst workflows is essentially, once again, we're going to kind of replace the HTTP localhost call, and we're now going to be making the workflow management API calls to our Catalyst project. And instead of talking directly to a sidecar, you're going to have this concept of a Catalyst app ID. And all of the SDK logic is the same. The gRPC stream is the same. But the other really nice thing is we basically provide a managed workflow experience. So you can enable managed workflows on a project. And that's going to give you that workflow store completely abstracted where you don't have to manage it at all. So we're basically storing all of that workflow state in a database that we manage. And so you can start using workflows basically immediately without having to configure pretty much anything. And you can also have the option, if you don't want to use that feature, to bring your own state store through our component support. So you could use something like Postgres, or you can use something like another transactional state store, which we support many of. So depending on your cloud provider of choice, you could pick the state store that makes the most sense for your use case. So one of the major improvements, we're going to talk now about some of the improvements not only in Dapr, but that are coming to Catalyst, is making the workflow API a more stable experience. So as you can imagine, because we're moving the sidecar from a hosted model where it's running in the same pod as the application workload, and now we're moving that to a remote environment where your application and the sidecar are not co-hosted, there is going to be connectivity and like reliability things that we want to make sure are sound and provide a really great user experience. So the team has been very hard at work really over the past like 6 to 8 months, making sure that workflows becomes a stable experience in Catalyst. So here are some of the improvements that are coming as the Dapr 115 release is approaching. So you can imagine that these will be available within probably the next month or so. And so we're introducing the Dapr scheduler service, which basically, or Dapr service scheduler, which basically enhances the scalability and the performance of Catalyst workflows. We also have dynamic actor support, which is something that was introduced into Dapr to help support the Catalyst use case. Because of like I mentioned, like the disconnection is going to be more prevalent whenever you have workloads that are no longer co-located. So making sure that we can handle those disconnections and reconnections is something that was really, really important. Another interesting thing is that Dapr workflows, it depends on the durable task framework, which came out of Microsoft. And we've done a ton of like really impressive improvements to durable tasks to help with the performance. And once again, the reliability for sure. And then we're also working on like scale. And that's something that obviously as Catalyst needs these workflow APIs to scale and the app IDs to scale. That is something that we're working on bringing to the Catalyst platform. So just wanted to let y'all know some of the kind of internal stuff we've been working on to make sure that workflows is a really, really great production ready experience for you in Catalyst. So let's talk a little bit about the fan out, fan in pattern that we're going to be using in today's demo. So basically what this allows us to do is that we can run multiple activities simultaneously and then wait and aggregate the results of those in order to end the workflow or to return a result. So that's what we're going to be doing today. And I can give you a little bit more context on this app, but I just wanted to kind of highlight you can basically use any pattern that makes sense for you, monitor pattern, as we mentioned earlier, saga pattern. But in today's case, we're going to do the fan out, fan in pattern. So today's demos are all going to focus around the loan broker workflow application. The way this is going to work is basically we're going to receive a loan request, which is going to start a workflow. The first part of that workflow is going to get the credit score for the request that's coming in. So in order to be able to give an accurate quote, we need to understand, how well the user has been managing their credit score. So we're going to do an activity that goes out and actually calls a credit bureau, and it's going to return to us a credit score. And if a credit score is available, then we're essentially going to use that fan out, fan in pattern to call 3 banks, right? These are banks, trusts, but ultimately this is mocking like a traditional loan broker type of scenario where we're checking the different rates and the different quotes that we can get from different providers. And then so as part of that, each one of these activities is going to make an external invocation call to a mocked sort of like bank external provider. And then we're basically going to aggregate the results of each quote that was returned. And then we're basically going to aggregate those quotes and we're going to publish them. And then we're going to, outside of the workflow, we're going to have a subscribing application, which is then going to store that information in a state store. So that is the workflow scenario today. The big things that we're really going to focus on in terms of the demo experience is going to be the publishing of the messages and the subscription and receiving of those via the new PubSub streaming capability. And then we're also going to touch on AWS authentication to external components for using SNS SQS in order to do that activity. Okay. So PubSub API streaming subscriptions. Kind of want to touch a little bit on this because it's going to be the first demo today. If we're just talking at a high level about how traditional subscriptions work. So the way that traditional PubSub works in Catalyst today, and this is something that we're going to demo in just a bit here, is that basically we publish a message, we have a message broker, and we receive that message on a particular route. And in order to do this in Catalyst, you have to create what's called a declarative subscription. So that declarative subscription is basically going to say, I want to target a specific application. I want to send the message to a particular route on that application, and I want to listen on a particular topic. Now, with streaming subscriptions, things are changing a bit here, right? So we're getting rid of that route. We no longer have to have that server there. And basically, the publisher is going to publish a message onto a message broker, and the subscriber is basically going to receive that message. And what's interesting is you can actually kind of implement a pool-based publishing and message consumption on top of PubSub brokers that may not traditionally support that model. And so that is what we're going to pop over and look at before we get into the next feature, if that works for everyone. As mentioned, we've already kind of seen what the workflow looks like in our slides, but I do want to show kind of just what we're looking at from a workflow perspective using the Catalyst UI. So let me pull this up. Because it's just, I always feel like a visual really helps when we're about to dive into code. Ooh, lots of failed, love that. Let's see, call graph. So here we can actually see what that same workflow that we had on the slide looks like when we run it using the Catalyst APIs. So I can kind of zoom in here and we basically see we have all of our services that we're calling across. We have our credit bureau, which we're calling out to get that credit score. And then we have the 3 banks that we're calling in parallel. And then you can also see the loan broker is publishing a message using the Diagrid pub sub, which we will switch out for an AWS service in just a bit. But this is essentially the code that we're about to walk through. So each of these green boxes represents an application that is running externally and has an app ID in Catalyst. So if we take a look at our main function here, this is where the loan request is going to be sent. All of this is in Python as mentioned. So what we're doing here, we're basically using that Dapr client to make a service invocation request to the credit bureau app using its app ID, which is provided by Catalyst, along with the API token provided by Catalyst. And we're basically retrieving that credit score. And if that response returns a result, then we basically will retrieve that credit score and create a new object to send to our workflow. So this is where we can actually see we're using that Dapr workflow SDK to start a workflow called the loan broker workflow. In that, we're going to have a request ID. We're going to have an amount, which is like the amount that the loan is being requested for, a term, 10 years, 20 years, and then basically that credit score that we retrieved from the other service. And then you can see we're using that workflow component for Dapr, which is we're on the under the hood, we're using Dapr as the workflow engine. So if we take a look at the actual workflow here, we'll kind of get a better understanding of what's happening as part of this flow. So here's where we see that fan out, fan in workflow being initiated. So we can see we're calling 3 different activities with the required input. And then we're basically saying when all of those activities are completed, which is what this when all method is basically in the SDK, then we're going to yield those results. And then we're basically going to have an aggregate quote. And this aggregate quote is going to essentially provide us with the 3 different responses we got from the 3 different banks. So that at that point, a user could basically determine what is their best option for taking out the loan. And then we're going to do one more thing, which we're going to call an activity called process results. And in that process results activity, we're going to essentially publish a message. So here we can see the various activities. And once again, the workflow definition is basically what structures how the workflow is going to execute, like order and those kind of things. However, the activities, like these activity methods, are actually where all external invocation calls should be made, all computation should be done. So your workflow should be fairly straightforward in terms of the workflow definition, and the activities is where your business logic should live. So these bank quotes will all look pretty similar. All we're doing is basically the workflow is calling using the service invocation API, the loan quote endpoint on each of these respective banks. If the invocation is successful, we'll return the result. And then once again, that's going to end up yielding at the same time as the other activities complete. And then last but not least, we're going to process those results. And I just wanted to kind of show you where we're publishing the event, because this is going to be relevant when we stream the result. So we can see we have a pub sub name for a pub sub component, which in this case, we've set to pub sub, which is going to use the Diagrid pub sub component. We have a topic name called quotes. So that just means this is where it's going to publish to. And then we're basically publishing that quote aggregate object, which has all of the returned responses from each bank. Perfect. So the way that we're able to actually run this application and generate this graph is that each one of these apps, which I believe I mentioned, but I'll just kind of reiterate it again. If I look at the loan broker app, for example, we get a couple of properties. We get a spiffy ID, which we're going to talk about in this session as well, but I also get that API token. And the 3 main things that an app needs to connect to these APIs is the HTTP URL of your project, the gRPC URL of your project, and the API token for that particular app ID. So each one of these represents what is traditionally like just the Dapr environment variables for connecting to the sidecar. And what's nice is once I've created all of my app IDs, I can do a Diagrid dev scaffold. And what this is going to do is it's basically going to scaffold a dev config file for me so that I can immediately configure all of my local applications to connect to Catalyst. So it's going to pull down the HTTP URL, the gRPC URL, the API tokens, and it's going to basically set those environment variables as part of the Diagrid run command. So that's what we've got here. And this is basically the finished product. So if you're familiar with Dapr, it'll probably look pretty familiar because it looks a lot like a Dapr run file, which we're going to be doing a demo of here in just a few minutes. But ultimately, you can see here, each of my app IDs, I provide the port on which I need to expose that application locally. Because, for example, if I want to invoke an application, right? How do I actually tell Catalyst to forward that invocation request to the receiver? That all happens through a tunnel that we manage. So if you put an app port in there, it's going to establish that tunnel. And then we basically pass in the app startup command, and it's going to go ahead and configure each application with the necessary environment variables. So let's go ahead and do a quick run here. Start. And once again, let's just pray the demo gods are with me, because I have been working on this for 2 days and it was working flawlessly this morning. So I'm gonna hold out hope that everything is great and working and fun. The only other thing that I want to confirm here, which is important, is am I publishing to the appropriate pub/sub components across all the applications? I am. I'm receiving from the quotes topic, so we should be good to go. So the way that I'm going to kick off this workflow is I'm going to send in the exact request payload that we just walked through to that loan request method. And what that's going to do, once again, get the credit score, run the workflow. So let's go ahead and send that request. Amazing. Awesome. So what's beautiful about this is it's like, okay, we could look at all these logs to see what's happening, but we can also go into our workflow visualizer. And I was hitting this with a ton of requests, and I think I got probably hit my limits there. But what's nice is we can also see this visually using the workflow explorer, right? So I can go in and I can see my execution started. I can see the input. And you'll also see some of this data. Some of this may or may not be relevant. We're still working on this. We still want to make sure we're exposing the right data to users. So ultimately, we will, continue to refine this user experience. But we can see each task was scheduled. So this is all those activities, right? Each activity basically schedules a task under the hood. And we can see we got back a score of 477 from Riverstone Bank. We sent in a score of 477 to Riverstone Bank, Titanium Trust, and Union Vault. And then we can see that each of the tasks completed, which is great. We can see that Riverstone Bank denied my loan request. I'm upset. We can see I was approved by Union Vault, so that's a little bit better with a rate of 4.5. And then we can see that I was rejected as well from Titanium Trust. So I think we know where I'm going because I only have one option, but we'll take what we can get. But we can also see that our final workflow actually finished with that aggregate, and it published this payload. So that's kind of an example of the workflow not completing until all of the aggregate results from all of those activities have been brought together. And then we can see that it went through. And what's interesting is, remember, I published to the component called pub/sub. We can go into Catalyst and we can see that we have a quotes topic. We can see the quote aggregator is subscribed. And we have no pending messages. So I can assume that we then were able to save that quote aggregate in the state store, which obviously I ran a test before this, which is why this is completely, it's still running. So we can see that we saved something. I'm not going to lie, we don't have a search today, which is a limitation. But what we can do is we can go ahead and save state for a different ID. But I'm assuming it's going to be all the way down at the bottom for 1. So we can see the results here. Denied 4.5. Awesome. So we know that all of it worked. It's really nice because we didn't have to manage literally any infrastructure at all. And we're currently using a traditional subscription. So now I want to show you how this is going to look a little bit different in the code whenever we use a non-declarative subscription, which is what the de facto has been and the only one that we supported. So let's go ahead and take a look at our quote aggregator service. This is the code that we're currently using. So what we basically did is we received the loan quotes on this particular route based on that declarative subscription. We processed it and we completed. I want to show you a streaming subscription example. So this is how you can easily switch the code out to use the new feature that we've created. So ultimately what's happening here is that when my application starts up, I'm basically initializing a subscription. And so you can see here that I'm basically using the Dapr SDK, and I'm using this subscribe with handler function to basically say I want to subscribe to the pub/sub component on the quotes topic. And whenever that message comes in, I want it to be handled by the loan quote method, essentially, or function. And you can see here, I'm just receiving an event, and then I'm basically publishing the event message. I'm publishing the source of the message, the name of the pub sub broker that it came in from. So it looks pretty similar, except for the fact that we're basically we don't have a route. We don't necessarily have to have a server here. We can just basically use this as that gRPC stream instead. So it's kind of similar to how Workflows opens that gRPC stream. We're going to have this connection. It's much more performant. It's a much better use of, like, I think Elena did on the Dapr 115 celebration, a bit of a performance comparison, and it's more performant. So that's great. And it also allows you to more dynamically subscribe and unsubscribe to topics when your application, at runtime. So what we're going to do is we're going to swap out our dev config file. Right now it's running the declarative main, and now I'm going to do the streaming. So all this is going to do is basically swap out the code file I'm using to now depend on a streaming subscription. So we're going to save that, and we're going to do a Diagrid subscription delete, just to show that subscription is no longer going to be in existence. Okay, cool. So if we do a Diagrid subscription list, we should see that we have no once this is done deleting, we will see that we have no subscriptions. Perfect. Okay, so let's rerun this once again. Test gods be with me. So we're going to do a Diagrid dev start. And if all goes well, what we're going to see is the streaming subscription startup. So do you see how it says attempting to start subscription started? Amazing. We got our init function called, our streaming subscription is started. If it's, good luck day, we see the streaming subscription immediately shows up in the Catalyst portal. You're not going to be able to edit it and modify it because obviously it's dynamic. So we're just kind of providing a read-only view of what the application is doing at runtime. But awesome. Now let's publish a message and let's see if we receive it. Okay. That's okay. This happens sometimes. We'll just do another quick Diagrid dev start. Can't win it everything. Okay. Try this again. Perfect. Transient issue. We see everything's happening, and we should be able to see that subscription come in. We'll try one more time. I've had some really good luck and some not so good luck today, so I apologize. Since I'm making the switch, I just want to make sure everything is going through the way that I hope. Come on. Nice. Okay. It didn't happen the first time. That's okay. We'll figure out why, but we can see we received event from loan broker published on the pub sub topic quotes. We can see the event contained the aggregate. So basically, once again, I don't have to have a declarative subscription. It's more dynamic. This is a brand new feature, truly. So there's probably going to be a couple bugs. Feel free to report them, but super excited about the introduction of this feature and to see how y'all play around with it. Okay, awesome. So the other thing I want to show you before I pass it over to Johnny is perfect.
No.
Okay. Okay, cool. And I hope all of y'all can see. Once again, I'll zoom in. I may have needed to do that. Okay. So our streaming subscription is good to go. We're feeling great. The other thing that I wanted to show is, like, right now we're using the pub sub and key value store built into Diagrid. The Diagrid project, you can enable them on startup, like super simple, super great. But once again, this is all about how we're like helping strengthen the story on AWS and make it easier for AWS developers, make it more secure. So another one of the exciting updates, and let me pull this, getting lost here. Another one of the nice updates that we've made is the support for securing your components with AWS IAM roles anywhere. So prior to this, you would have to provide basically passwords in order for us to be able to access your SNS SQS instance or your S3 or DynamoDB. Basically now you can use native, the spiffy identities of each app ID or of your collective project in order to basically be able to assume roles from Catalyst. So it completely removes the need for passwords, which I'm very excited about. So just some of the benefits, once again, credential-free authentication. It's also just a general stronger security posture. We're doing, we're making sure that we re-verify credentials. Sam Coyle, who's an engineer here, did an amazing job on this feature. And so I think I'll be really happy with it. And it eliminates the need for like a bunch of extra IAM roles. So The Spiffy identity also provides like a standard identity that we can use across different cloud providers as well, which is super, super nice. So we will definitely be bringing some of these capabilities for the public service to other cloud providers as demanded. So yeah, let's walk through basically just continuing on the same demo. So we've got our streaming subscription, and right now we're listening to the PubSub component, which is PubSub. So what I want us to do is go in and create an AWS component. And I should have let's see, I should have some things up to make this a little easier to follow. Okay, perfect. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to create a new component. I can do this through the UI or the CLI. And in this case, I'm going to do it for SNS SQS, and we're going to swap out the broker that we're using under the hood. Instead of using the Diagrid one, we're going to use one running on AWS. So scopes are really important, and I think especially for this feature, scopes dictate which app IDs are able to load a particular component. So for example, my credit bureau, my Riverstone Bank, none of them are publishing nor receiving messages. So if I do not scope those in, they will not have access to the PubSub broker. So it's just part of that like least privileges story. I can then go in and pick an authentication profile, and this is typically what you would have to do before we added this new feature, which is I have to go get like generate some kind of like user and provide a secret key, which is not ideal. So what you can do now is use this AWS IAM roles anywhere. And we have a doc which walks you through in detail how you can configure this. It's truly so fast. Like it maybe takes 5 minutes to do. That's like maybe the most amount of time. So if you're familiar with AWS, this should be like very straightforward. And there's a really good doc that will walk you through exactly what I'm going to walk you through. But essentially what you're going to do to start out is you're going to go into roles anywhere and you're going to create a trust anchor, which is basically going to establish the relationship between your AWS account and Diagrid Cloud. So basically I went in, I created a new trust anchor, and then I basically pasted in this bundle that we've made public for our certificates or for our trust, our trust certificates. The second thing I'm going to do once I have that trust anchor done, which basically is a copy and paste exercise, I'm then going to go in and create a role. And in this role, I'm going to specify the permissions that I need for this particular component. So really, I only need to provide SNS and SQS, and depending on the level of control that you want Catalyst to have over like topic auto creation, for example, you can dictate which permissions that your component or that you want to give to Catalyst essentially. So in this case, I gave it probably a little bit more permission than it needed, but I could remove those. I can provide whatever permissions, but you get the point. Very similar to traditional role creation. The only difference is that you're going to add a trust relationship to an external entity, which in this case is going to be referencing that trust anchor that you created in IAM roles anywhere. So you can see I have the ARN, that resource number for the trust anchor that I created. So I got that directly from here. Once you have that, you're then going to pass in a Spiffy identity for your project. Now, Sam did this for me. She did not push out a change to actually roll out the Spiffy ID that you will typically see here. So it's a little bit more permissive for the sake of this demo. But ultimately, you can get as specific as you want with the permissions, with the app IDs you provide these permissions to. So for example, let's just go ahead and look here. This is what it's going to look like once she rolls out that release after the webinar. So you're going to pass in your Catalyst org ID and the Catalyst project. And then this star will basically say all app IDs that are scoped will be able to use this, right? So pretty much if I scoped 2 apps to it, they'll have access from that project. If I want to be more explicit, I can go into the app IDs page in Catalyst, and I can say like, I only want to provide access to these 2 apps. We're going to ignore that for a second. And we're going to grab the Spiffy identity here, and we can add the explicit identities to be more granular about the way that we provide access to this component. So that's just something to be aware of. After I've created the role, which is once again, pretty familiar process, I'm going to do one last step, which is I'm going to go back to roles anywhere and I'm going to create a profile. And what that profile is basically the bridge between the role that you created in IAM and the roles anywhere. So what this is going to do is basically I'm going to associate that Catalyst role with the Catalyst profile that I've created. And that Catalyst role, once again, already references the trust anchor that I created. So Very simple process. Once you do it once, and you don't really have to do it many times, right? Once you've created the trust anchor for your project, you don't have to do it again, even if you're, changing the roles and permissions. So what you're going to do, or what we're going to do, is we're going to paste in these properties. So I need the trust anchor ARN, which I can get from that trust anchor here. I need the trust profile ARN, which we just created here. We're going to paste this in. And then the role that we want to assume, which is the Catalyst role. So we're going to take that Catalyst role and we're going to copy that ARN. Awesome. Okay. And then we're going to give this a name. So I'm going to call it AWS PubSub. I'm going to continue, and we can see all the information is in there. We're going to save. It looked like I was having some issues here. Okay, everything's good. So it's processing, fingers crossed, we should get ready. And once that's ready, we'll basically, perfect. Once it's ready, we can now seamlessly use AWS SNS SQS in our demo instead of using the managed Diagrid PubSub. So let's go here, and we're going to replace that environment variable with AWS PubSub. Awesome, awesome. I could probably do a find and replace, but we're just going to be super safe today. Okay, awesome. Now let's save all those. So the only thing I'm changing is that environment variable. Nothing else is changing. I'm still using streaming subscriptions. I'm still publishing the same messages. The SDKs are exactly the same. There's no AWS code. There's no AWS passwords. So now I'm going to do a Diagrid dev start. Okay, so we see our workflows up and running. Our subscription has been started. And if we go to the API logs, we should actually see that request. So I also want to call out when your request comes in to subscribe, you should be able to see it here. So we know that that streaming subscription was initiated. We can see it showing up, and we can see that the component it's now referencing is AWS PubSub instead of PubSub, which is still here, just not being used. So let's publish a message and let's see what happens. Okay, we were able to receive the message from the subscriber flawlessly, all happening through AWS without a single code change, just a quick environment variable flip. And we can see that we received the event, which was published on AWS PubSub on the topic quotes, and we can see what the event contained. So super happy that worked out. And yeah, hope y'all are as excited about some of these new features as I am. I feel like the gRPC streaming stuff is really great. And I'm also really excited about some of the further integration we're going to be doing with AWS. I just want to highlight as well, one thing Sam's been working on in addition to this is providing support for more AWS components. So right now we support S3, SNS, SQS, Kinesis, DynamoDB, MSK, and RDS Aurora. And then also an upstream, the secrets manager in AWS and the parameter store. And then the things that we're still working on bringing into Catalyst are Kinesis and SES. So super excited. We're going to have more support for more AWS components so that we make building AWS applications with Catalyst easier. So that was is there any questions on what we just saw with AWS IAM? Cool. I don't see any questions. Okay, awesome. Just want to clarify, maybe there was something in the chat. There are a ton. You can go through and basically see all of the different components that we support across each of the APIs. And if there's any that you're interested in us bringing in, we are considering bringing in alpha components so that you can try out components that aren't necessarily at stable yet, which we've done for at least a couple components, I believe. I think we did it for at least one of them. Let's see, alpha. We do that? We haven't done that yet, but that's definitely something we're considering. So if there are other components that aren't here today, definitely let us know if there are some that you're interested in using. So I am going to pass it over to Johnny to do one more demo to show a little bit about some of the work we're doing to bridge the gap between Dapr and Catalyst from a developer experience perspective. But if you have any other questions about these features or anything else coming to Catalyst, please feel free to ask at any time. Connect with us on the Dapr Discord channel or on the Diagrid Discord channel. We have many ways to get a hold of us. So Johnny, I'll pass it over to you.
Perfect. Thank you very much. I do apologize. My network is dropping quite a lot. I'm on a shared network at the moment, so hopefully it's not causing too many issues. So yeah, firstly, I'm Johnny, one of the engineers working on the Catalyst product. I've got a few minutes just to quickly show a sort of alternative local development experience that we're working on. This is very much a sort of a prototype that we're sort of looking for feedback on. So if this, what I do show is sort of your preferred method of doing local development with Catalyst, we'd love to hear that. So please do give us feedback. All right, perfect. So folks who are familiar with sort of the open source project Dapr are probably familiar with the concept of a multi-run or multi-app run file. So yeah, anyway, it's basically if you're familiar with Dapr, you're probably familiar with multi-app run files. Again, it's a way of describing your applications, how they're going to interact with Dapr, such as which ports they're going to expose, how the command runs, etc., like that. So we were thinking about how we can bring this sort of experience to Diagrid and to Catalyst. One of the things you've just seen Kendall do is she's running like commands such as Diagrid, dev, scaffold, and this is kind of like our equivalent of how you do these run commands. And it is all about like creating application identities, creating components and all that sort of stuff inside our cloud and then hooking all that up. So we're trying to bring an alternative experience, which is really, I guess, twofold. The first thing is, can we bring a minimal dependencies for install? Do you need infrastructure, or can we just get you up and running with SDKs, your applications, and Catalyst as a dependency? Here I am inside the Catalyst Loan Broker application. This is the same one that Kendall just shared. I can just have a look at code. Sorry, just have a look at VS Code just to pull this up. So there's nothing different in here except that I have a Dapr.yaml file. So this is a Dapr multi-run file. At this point, I do not have a project. I do not have any application identities. I don't have anything configured inside Catalyst other than that I'm logged in. So then I'm going to do this new command, which we've added, or at least prototype. This isn't available just yet. Again, welcome feedback, which is effectively Diagrid dev Dapr run, and then you're passing in the Dapr, the multi-app run file. I'm just giving it a project name here, and I'm saying managed, right? And so managed is going to use all of those managed services. So I don't need any infrastructure locally. I don't even need to run Redis locally or anything like that. I can just lean on the Catalyst platform. So if I go ahead and run that, and again, my network is a little bit funny, so you might see some connectivity issues. But effectively, what this does is it's going to go and create all of that, those resources inside Catalyst for you based on that multi-app run file. So this just gives you a very quick way to get up and running with Catalyst without having to go through all of the rigmarole of going into the UI or the CLI and creating each of the resources individually. We can just take that definition from the multi-app run file, create those for you, and hook up with your application. So this is just popped up the Catalyst UI. I can then come in here and get things like the call graphs straight out of the bat. So hopefully when this is loading, again, my connection is pretty awful, so I do apologize. Maybe I'll try the API logs, maybe a little bit more intensive. Obviously, these would be if I had a connection, but you would get the whole sort of Catalyst experience out of the box for running locally. I don't know what's just happened. I think things have timed out. Yes, I've timed out. Again, sorry, network is not working. File to bring your local development for Catalyst. And from this point on, effectively everything would be the same as Kendall said. So it's just a way of basically bootstrapping. I know we've only got a couple of minutes, but I did want to show an alternative, which is I won't run this one because of my networking issues, but to give you an idea of a very simple Dapr project. So this is taking a quick start for PubSub from the upstream Dapr project. Again, you just have your Dapr run file. So this is just a upstream Dapr multi-run file. It's pointing at a components folder saying my app IDs. You can then have your applications as normal. These are just normal Dapr applications from the quick start. And I can specify my PubSub here and subscription. All of this is using the open source CRDs, right? These are the open source APIs that we're using. They will be, they are compatible with Catalyst. They will get something that I also do want feedback on, which is I think is an interesting concept, is that you could run local dependencies. So you could run Redis locally in Docker. Here I'm just using something like ngrok to allow that tunnel to come back to my local machine, and that would all work correctly. So I would be able to just run my local applications, local dependencies, and have it all integrate with Dapr seamlessly locally. We obviously would maybe not use ngrok directly like this. We would be able to bake that into our offering so that you can get that really nice seamless development flow set up straight away from your laptops. So I apologize that the demo was a little bit broken due to my network connectivity, but hopefully it was clear what I was trying to get across. And if you're excited about this direction, then please do give us feedback.
We just want to kind of let you all in on some of our thought process on how we're really trying to enhance the Catalyst experience, make it very easy to kind of use the existing Dapr experience as well, if that's the world that you're coming from. And so we'll definitely see more ideation around this in the next couple of months.